Testing, testing.
Boom, boom, boom. Okay. Sounds good. There you go.
Okay. We'll call the October 16th, 2024 meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Mr. Trainer, can you call the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Duncan,
Here?
Mr. Krasner,
Here.
Ms. Comont,
Here.
Mr. Stevens.
Here.
All right, thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you. And we will adopt the agenda. It's a pretty light agenda tonight. Did anybody have any suggested changes?
Move to adopt the agenda. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we have an agenda. So I think the first no speaker series tonight, so the first thing up is receipt of petitions. And I know we have some written correspondence. Would you kindly summarize, Mr. Trainer?
Yeah, we had several written petitions to the Planning Commission tonight. Sam Butler of 132 Spring Court wrote in favor of proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance around accessory dwellings. Jacob Williams wrote in supporting the bicycle master plan proposed updates. George Lee also wrote in supporting proposed updates to the bicycle master plan. Anne Marie Havid of 805 Hillwood Avenue also wrote in supporting proposed updates to the bicycle master plan. Garrett G. of Greenway Downs also wrote in support of proposed updates to the bicycle master plan with recommended edits included. And then Falls Church Forward and several affiliated residents wrote in supporting proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance related to commercial parking.
Great, thank you so much. Let's see. Sorry, just getting back to my agenda. Do we have any in-person petitions for tonight?
No, Chair.
So that brings us to our first action item, and the first one up is the commercial parking zoning amendment public hearing. Would you like to introduce this, Mr. Fuller?
Yes, thank you. I'll introduce this. You've seen this previously. Tonight, we have advertised public hearing. Staff has recommended approval of this, and this is a recommendation to council by the Planning Commission. Council is scheduled to hear it on October 28th next. So I'll turn this over to Jack. He's our staff person on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Do we need to technically open and close the public hearing?
I was going to ask you about that. When do I do that? Do I do that
We
after?
can do it now before I give the presentation.
Okay, so do we need to take a vote to do that?
No, the chair can.
We can do it anytime.
Say,
If there were
we're-
people here, we might want people to listen to staff and then have a chance to comment, but since there's nobody.
yeah, I wasn't sure when in the order of operations and who
Yeah.
does it, so I'm happy to open the public hearing.
You do it.
And
Close
so
it.
do we leave it open while you do the presentation in case anybody arrives and would like to speak? Or do we close the public hearing?
You can, but I think since no one's here, we might as well
Okay.
just close it so we don't forget.
So
Just
we'll,
hope we can reopen it.
okay, we'll close the public hearing, reopen it if we have some late arrivals.
Okay. Well, thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Fuller, for the introduction. Before you tonight, Planning Commission is proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance related to excluding the first 1,000 square feet of individual commercial uses in off-street parking requirement calculations. Staff does recommend approval of the proposed motion. And on the proposed motion, staff has included, one, the proposed motion that includes the 1,000 square foot number that council referred out, and an alternative part of that motion has also been provided based on discussion that the Planning Commission had previously, that includes language supporting exemptions of up to the first 1,500 square feet. So going into updates, there's a added whoops, let me move this here. On line 45, we've included a new section to the staff report called Updates Since Council's First Reading. This is largely the same content that was included in the last staff report, but is shaded gray just because it's a new section. And to just to call out what all those updates have been since council's first reading. The first is the first line of the proposed code amendment to section 48-1003E was edited to clarify that all new non-residential uses would be eligible for reduced parking requirements that meet specific criteria when applying for a certificate of occupancy. The second addition is additional criteria were added, and there were two. The first is the additional criteria that the building changing use cannot have a gross floor area of 20,000 square feet or greater. And then also the additional requirement that's consistent with additional criteria that council referred out, which is that the building changing use cannot be subject to off-street parking agreements to be eligible for the proposed parking reductions. And then the second two updates are new updates since the Planning Commission last reviewed this on August 7th. The first is a clarification on the shopping center parking rate language. So as needed, staff will continue to research individual site plans for each property that is eligible to be parked at the shopping rate, or is suspected of being approved under such parking rates, but recognizing the staff time and resources required to research every such case, staff added the clarification that properties eligible to be parked as shopping centers under the current code would not be eligible for the parking reduction. And then the last update is a restructuring of the subject section of the zoning ordinance, which is 48-1003. And I'll jump to it in a second because it's easier to walk through it with it up on the screen. But in addition to restructuring that section, staff also struck a proposed deletion of an existing regulation, which allows the zoning administrator to have discretion over parking relief for non-conforming spaces. This is meant to keep some flexibility on the city's behalf, and also continues to offer a relief valve for applicants should they decide to explore parking reduction of greater than 1,000 square feet. So to go down to that code section, just to kind of reiterate the restructuring. So the bulk of the amendments is in subsection B of 48-1003. These were originally included at the bottom of this section down here, but taking into consideration the deletion of the deletion of this existing regulation, staff bumped this up to the top to communicate that this would be the first consideration. So any eligible business or building changing use interested in exploring parking reductions under this section would first go through the proposed changes, which is up to 1,000 square feet, and then the additional zoning administrator discretion would kick in, which requires submission of a typical parking management plan. It includes all of the things listed here, like the type of uses, the number of employees, building design capacity, and then other site-specific things. So these kind of submissions can be particularly burdensome to the smallest of businesses, which again, the proposed amendment is meant to support. So again, getting rid of that first 1,000 square feet would disproportionately benefit the smallest businesses in the city. And then those that are of medium or larger size that have parking burden left over can continue to request the zoning administrator review their case after they submit what ostensibly is a traditional parking reduction petition.
Great.
And just want to touch on a couple. So those are the updates in the actual proposal. Also included in the staff report are updated parking reduction numbers for those examples that have been included in the staff report at the 1,500 square foot level. And then lastly, the last kind of new thing to the staff report is an acknowledgement of a request that was brought up at the last time the Planning Commission reviewed this item, which is that a year from such time that any amendments are adopted, staff would come back to the Planning Commission with a report on how the program's going, what we've observed. So we've included that promise. So I'll just wrap up with the public engagement schedule. This started back in April. We're now in middle October. So after several month kind of review process, following tonight's Planning Commission's public hearing, the City Council is scheduled to have their final action take place at its October 28th meeting. So that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it back to you. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So we've had we had one work session on this item, and then one was supposed to be, I think, a public hearing that turned into a work session because it was delayed, so.
Right, we had an advertisement snafu,
That's
so the
right.
last public hearing turned
That's
into
right. So I
a
think
work
this is the
session.
third time, so I guess I'll just open it up to my fellow commissioners. I think, Mr. Krasner, you were not with us for the second discussion. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about kind of where things are at this point, or if anybody else would like to weigh in?
Yeah.
Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, shall I go?
Great.
Okay. Well, thanks to staff for pulling this together. I'm certainly going to vote for it. I kind of look at this as an opportunity for us to lend our support to fine-tuning our parking regulations. And in this instance, it's to encourage the formation of new businesses in old buildings. And it kind of prompted me to recall a quote from Jane Jacobs, "New ideas often need old buildings." That seemed very appropriate for this situation. And I think as I looked through all of the materials here, I think it'll enhance the city's reputation as a good, small business-friendly place that we like to think of ourselves. This will enhance that. Obviously, there's a lot of positives to that in terms of tax revenues and just maybe making our city a more interesting place to live because of the diversity of businesses that it hopefully will attract. I think we all know that the commercial rental market has changed considerably over the last 10 years, and that unless we make an effort on occasion to revise our codes, we risk discouraging businesses to locate here. So I think we also know that we need to have an overall review of parking regulations, but that's going to take some time. And I think in the meantime, we can support implementation of this type of a limited proposal to reduce the amount of parking spaces that are required. And I think what it does, in effect, is it leaves it more up to businesses to decide themselves on what's needed for their success. They certainly don't want to open up a business and not have the ability for customers to gain access to their whatever it is that they're offering. The only risk I think that is identified here, and staff identified this, is that it might lead to some spillover of street parking. And my sense is that there are tools available that the city has demonstrated in the past to address any harms should that occur. But I think whatever risk there is of spillover parking, that has to be weighed against the harms of parking regulations adopted, obviously, many decades ago. And I would add that just taking a quick look at the regulations, and it's one of the items that's in the attachments, becomes clear that it's somewhat arbitrary in how these different uses and the amount of parking that was attached to each of those was developed. So all of this, bottom line, is that I think this is something I can easily vote for.
Great, thank you, Mr. Stevens. Any other comments?
I have a few questions.
Yeah, please.
Sorry. A few questions, that maybe because I wasn't here at the, yeah, I remember when we talked about, when we talked about this originally, which must have been in June. And then I missed the, it was August, I guess, when you guys talked about it the second time when I was away. And so I forgive me if like some questions that I raised in June, and I did read through everything, and I kind of see, I guess I can see from what was amended, you know, how things shook out. But I know in June I'd asked the question about, you know, the sort of the building square footage versus, you know, multi-tenant. I know we've excluded shopping centers, but then like a multi-tenant, you know, building that, you know, and is it applying to the whole building or per use? It looks like we kept it as per use. And so could you just like walk me through what the thought process was on that? You know, was there any consideration given to that, and what that might mean in like a multi-tenant building where like all the uses are less than 1,000 square feet?
Sure. So right, yeah, I think in response to that, that's when the 20,000 square foot cap came in on the building changing use as a whole, but the reduction would apply to individual tenant spaces. So right, because if the target is, you know, on our smallest businesses, the most vulnerable building stock are those older, kind of smaller commercial buildings, which probably only have 1 or 2 tenants blocks in them anyway. And so I think the thinking was that this would probably get most at those kind of buildings and help preserve those, whereas the larger buildings would become excluded, whether they, you know, fall into the shopping center definition or you know, are too large to be eligible beyond that 20,000 square feet. So keeping it at an individual tenant basis was also kind of tied to the certificate of occupancy requirement and how we'd actually administer this reduction.
Okay. And I do appreciate that. I think it sounds like council asked for it too, but the map, I mean, I appreciate that you guys, I think I mentioned that in June, and other people have mentioned it probably too. It's helpful to see on a map, you know, the buildings we're talking about that might be eligible. I mean, obviously there's some on here that we, you know, can pick out that have either already been redeveloped or some that may, you know, like in Gordon Road, a lot of those buildings probably have other plans slated for them in the future. I think, you know, obviously I think the buildings that everyone's the most concerned about are probably along Washington Street, you know, north and south, specifically north, you know, right, some of the older buildings there that, you know, I'm not as familiar with, you know, how exactly what their tenant, you know, situation is. It seems like some of those have more vacancy, you know, than others, and to the extent, you know, this will help them, that's a good thing. But yeah, it's, you know, it's a balancing act. I mean, right-sizing parking, I mean, I'm probably, you know, I think generally the commission I know is anti-parking minimums of any kind, and I'm kind of getting in that direction. I've been, you know, in the planning game a long time, and things evolve, and me included, and so I kind of get that, you know, like it's, you know, and so I think that to some degree, like I get the argument like for having no requirements, but you still have to have options, you know. I know like in other parts of the region, you know, your proximity to metro and other things, you don't need, there's no parking requirements, and you know, where there are options. I mean, here, I think, you know, I think the large percentage of folks, you know, are driving. But with that said, you know, the people, you could argue it's the market. You know, if there's not available spaces, people will find another way. You know, they'll park. They'll find a legal place, hopefully a legal place to park, either on this public street or, you know, somewhere else. There are, you know, so I don't anticipate this would be a huge problem. I mean, sometimes we've seen it with like individual uses that have come in, like the La Tingeria thing, you know, which actually speaks to, you know, speaking of that, I don't know if we address it here, we probably don't. I know I'm kind of like not asking a question, I'm just kind of editorializing here, but, you know, there's a weird part of our ordinance. If we're looking at our ordinance and how we treat parking, you know, there's that weird part of our ordinance that talks about like not using the street for storage or this or that. There's like a weird phrase, some weird phrasing in our ordinance that probably dates back, I don't know how long. And I remember like that came to light in the La Tingeria thing. They were using that as somehow as like some way to say that businesses couldn't like, you know, the patrons of a business couldn't park on a street. It was kind of strange, but I guess you guys didn't look at that as part of this. You're kind of targeted specifically on the rates, but I feel like that needs to be looked at as well, you know, because that, if we're going to shift some of the parking to like on-street parking, you know, by not having as much on private property, which is fine, we're kind of shifting, you know, some of that. We need to make sure that, you know, there's nothing else standing in the way of that, or we don't find ourselves in a situation like we did there where, you know, people are kind of saying, well, we don't want business, you know, patrons of these businesses parking on our street. In that case, you were adjacent to residential, but most of our commercial areas are adjacent to residential. So anyhow, I don't know. I'm kind of talking a lot, not asking a lot of questions, but I still have a concern about how that would be, and it may, you know, it may not ever be something that causes a huge problem. A lot of these buildings don't have that many tenants. The ones we're talking about, they're smaller. There's a chart in here, right? Is there a chart that breaks it out by square footage? I think you did have something
For the
somewhere.
businesses?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's at line like two,
Where's
it's on
that?
page 16, line 228 or so.
Is it about is the building square
Sorry,
footage?
it's 258.
258.
The square footage of
Or the
different.
certificates of occupancy?
And actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, Mr. Krasner, because this table came up in our last discussion in August, if you don't mind me interjecting.
Yeah, go for it.
And this is actually one of the reasons that we discussed moving to a 1,500 square foot cap, because if you look at this table, like roughly that 1,000 square footage you might help, if you consider this helping, right, businesses, which I think is the goal that we have in mind, you would be helping maybe the smallest 30-ish% of businesses. Whereas if you looked at a 1,500 square foot, you would be helping maybe the smallest 60% of businesses. So sort of we discussed raising that cap in order to make this available to a wider array of businesses and more. So that's sort of the source of that. This table in particular was kind of what
Okay.
supported that general decision
Right.
from
But the
group.
staff is still showing 1,000.
The staff recommendation is 1,000, and I think Mr. Trainer, you can confirm this, but I think the reason for that is that was what council had originally referred to us, and there's some question about whether it would be legal for us if there's like a substantive change in us recommending 1,500. So my
Right.
feeling on that is, let's recommend what we think is the right number, or up to whatever is legally permissible. I think the way you've worded it here makes sense. And then council can decide in consultation with the city lawyer.
Yeah, that's correct, Madam Chair. We stuck with the 1,000 square foot recommendation just to be consistent with what council referred out. We did work with the city attorney on that alternative language, and she has said that going up to 1,500 square feet, you know, would not trigger the need for a new first reading. There is no hard cap, but she recommended that language just because 1,500 kind of has been at least the highest number, I think, discussed between council and planning commission, at least to date, so that was what was included in that alternative language.
Speaking of question on that, I mean, do we advertise a range? I mean, sometimes I know it's permissible to advertise like a range. I mean, if we didn't do that in the future, we should probably do that. I mean, you know, if that's kind of common to advertise like a range, and then, you know, no one's boxed in, and, you know, having to re-advertise because we don't like the one number. But anyhow, so you're saying and the reason we got to 1,500, again, I apologize because I wasn't here in August, was because of the chart on page 16 that shows that gets you the 50%, like half of the 50 or 60%. Yeah, approximately, a little more than 50% of the,
Yeah, that's correct.
right, based
Yeah.
on the most recent COs that were issued.
Which I think, if you think about it, is still somewhat conservative.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to know where those COs were geographically, like how many of those were in these buildings. Some of these were probably in shopping centers. They wouldn't have been eligible anyway. Do we know that? No.
Yeah, I think we were just we weren't going by geography, but the most recent CO submitted.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know. I guess we don't know, and some of it, obviously, if there are potential tenants that don't wind up signing a lease, we never know about it. It's a private issue, but, okay. And I saw we did get, right, some letters of support from the, right, like the EDA and the chamber. Well, it's the kind of thing where we can always, see how it goes. It's the kind of thing where it's not, and I appreciate that what's in there talks about coming back. And that's also a good rule of thumb. I think I forget if we did that with T-zones, we might have. We didn't, we should do it with ADUs as well. Whatever we decide is to require that staff comes back in a year or 18 months and provides a report on, what's actually happened, as opposed to just hearing sort of anecdotally, it's working, it's not working, so I support that. That's in here somewhere, right? Is that in our motion? If it's
Not
not,
in the motion, does it need to be?
I think we should put that in the motion. I think it's,
Can include it in the
or it's like
motion.
a follow-on motion, or however we want to do it, that recommends that staff come back in 12
I
or
think that was
18
just part of
months.
your report.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we included in the motion, just in the staff report, but.
I think we should, at least to tell council, and they can decide if they agree with us, but I think it'd be good, that way we know if the number is working, maybe we want it to be higher, maybe we want it to be lower, we don't know, but I think it'd be helpful, and that way you guys have a set deadline, so to speak, timeline, and, and you'll come back at that time and show us what's going on, and we can decide if, the data bears out and the need for any changes or adjustments. I feel like that's the best way to do it. For something like this, because it's true. I don't think any of us know for sure. Obviously it's hard to get it right, down, down to the square foot. But yeah, I'm comfortable with 1,000. I guess if we're going to vote for 1,500, I don't want to sink the whole thing. I'm willing, as long as there's some kind of safeguard to have them come back and let's have staff let us know how it's going. I'm okay with it. To see how it goes and see if it makes a difference and positive difference, or if it causes any unexpected problems, and then we can try to address those later.
And we do have tools available for, overflow parking in our residential neighborhoods, the permit parking
Yeah, we
program,
do,
two-hour
yeah.
limits,
And I'm
those
not-
kinds of things
and of
that
course
can be
yeah.
managed.
And I'm not a big fan of the permit parking.
Right.
If it's public parking, it's public parking, and it is a push and pull between a city and having the expectation versus a more suburban mindset of the expectation of free parking when you arrive at a business. We're kind of we kind of straddle that. I think there are certain destinations in town where people just plan around it. There's certain businesses, they're referenced in some of the letters, that, I think someone references in one of the letters, they might have referenced Thompson Italian or somebody where they, that now they don't have obvious free parking,
I've gotten very used to parking at Kaiser.
Yeah, and then before it was a public
It's very-
lot anyway, but regardless, people I think just know that, if they're going to a more urban destination and, parking is gonna be, in that, somewhere maybe within a block or two. Or if you're just, a lot of people are Ubering these days anyway and they get dropped off. That too.
Or hopefully
walking.
riding a bike or walking,
Walking,
because
if they're
we're
local.
investing in that infrastructure too, right?
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
anyhow, okay, I'm okay with whatever number the commission wants to put in the motion, 1,500 or 1,000,
Okay,
either way.
thank you. Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I feel emboldened to evolve since I'm following the lead of Mr. Krasner on this. Most of the points that I jotted down have already been made, so I won't bother to repeat them. Thanks to the staff for the responses to the questions that both we and the council have voiced. This is a subject, as we heard at our last meeting, that stirs the usual passions because parking is just one of those hot-button issues. For the reasons that Mr. Krasner listed, we still straddle between being urban and suburban and have aspirations to be more walkable and bikeable and be less reliant on our cars, and yet we do still, many of us, get around town by car. I guess I would just, second the motion for trying to aim a little higher for 1,500 square feet, just because of that chart, on line 258. I mean, if we're going to have gone to all this trouble to assemble all this information and have staff collect and hear from the public, both sides, I'd like to at least try to help out, half or so of the target audience here. It seems like it's worth. And there are guardrails, as you've indicated. The 1,500 square feet still would not reach a certain percentage of folks. That's significant. Neighborhood parking protections do exist. There is a process for that, so if there is overflow in some commercial lot that impinged on the neighborhood, there's a means of remedy there. Look-back provision is, I think, a good idea. Probably ought to be done more often for most things that we do here. We should take a look a year or so down the road and see how what we did played out. If I could ask, just so that I can put some, concrete thinking around this, a building like 603 West Broad, I'm not sure if that shows up in I think it's probably in one of the charts, the old bank building, which is now Smoothie King on the ground floor, physical therapy on the second floor, and an empty space on the other half of the ground floor. And parking for, I don't know, probably 20 cars, I guess, between those the two businesses that are already working and the one that would come. If I wanted to move into the empty space on the ground floor and set up, I don't know, some sort of consultancy office or whatever, not something that would involve a lot of foot traffic, maybe seeing people one at a time, something like that. Is what we're doing tonight going to be helpful to me? I mean, I don't know exactly what the square footage is, but I'm pretty sure that building would be under 20,000 square feet, I think. And the first floor space certainly is, not much more than 20 by 20 or whatever. It's not a big number. And I went for CO for my consultancy that I wanted to locate there. What's my experience? Is somebody going to ask me, you're going to have to provide 5 parking spots to open that consultancy? Or does that fall in the category of, it's okay, it's just basically a sort of a one-person office use operation? Or does it need to go through this process that we're proposing to approve here?
So a couple part questions there. So I think this is the building on South Lee Street. That's now the Smoothie King.
Yeah, Smoothie King.
It's eligible, appears eligible, barring, any, perhaps a peek at the, any site plan that may show that it does have parking reductions. We need to do that for each individual property. So caveat here is that each, this is done in GIS, so we're looking primarily at size. And then the shopping center recommendations, those that we could kind of do on the highest level. But, when a tenant does come in for their certificate of occupancy, and, any associated trade permits, upon that zoning review, it'd be zoning staff doing that review, seeing, okay, where's the property and what's the use? What are the current parking requirements for that use? And then applying that reduction as part of its kind of everyday administrative review. Mm-hmm. So we're still, kind of working with the zoning staff about, how, if we need to amend any existing forms or, kind of the behind the scenes work about how that's gonna, if the applicant will need to kind of call that out, or if staff's gonna be trained to do that on our own, but that'll be part of the kind of regular zoning review when looking at certificate of occupancy.
So no matter what, that's good. So no matter what we're doing here tonight, there's still an administrative regulatory process of some sorts that an applicant would need to go through. It's not like we're just throwing the doors open and say,
No,
go in with however many cars or whatever line of work you're doing. That's not the way it's going to work. It's going to work the way that you described.
right. I mean, it's part of the regular kind of process that happens today. So either way, zoning's going to review it and see what the current, parking rate is, as they would for any business. But now, as part of their review, they would signal that this property is actually eligible here when applying that reduction.
Okay, and by extension, if, my business or whatever business were to go in there, ended up leading to that parking lot filling up with the Smoothie King business and the physical therapy business and this third putative business, and people started parking on the street, the residential street right around the corner, and that was causing problems. If that touched off a petition process to get 75% of the folks to say we need to have residents-only parking on our residential street because it's, crowded or whatever, that process could still play out and be, decided on in the course of events as in other locations like, when the Harris Teeter went in. We did that for a lot of Winter Hill, Cherry Hill.
Right, yeah, that's one of the, safeguards that are in the code is this residential permit parking. There's nothing prohibiting or changing that process. That's already there, where residents could raise that petition, and then the kind of normal counting and program administration would play out to implement new residential parking. That's very much still at play, right, and is an important safeguard. So yeah, this process in no way changes that.
Okay, good. All right. Well, I just want to get that on the record because, folks who came and spoke with us earlier on this were, as I say, quite passionate about it and concerned about existing businesses, and that's great that they're loyal to those businesses and concerned about them, but so are we, and we would like to hope that we could attract the kind of businesses and generate the sort of commerce that would be more reliant on walking or biking or taking the metro or, not necessarily everybody getting in their car to do everything. And we would like to nudge the city along in that direction, I think, wherever we can get a plausible, reasonable opportunity. And it seems like this is one such. Just in closing, at the chamber luncheon yesterday, I'm not there to hang a shingle out and take complaints or suggestions, but no one in particular seemed to speak to this. The candidate forum was the agenda, and both candidates responded to questions, some of which related to parking and some of the issues that we talk about here. And I did not get any sense of any great uproar or concern in the business community that existing businesses would be harmed if we tried this. So that helps me feel that, the business community, the existing business community is comfortable enough with it that they're willing to let us see if it might happen. Okay, I think that's all I have to add. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad you mentioned existing businesses. I think that's the one thing that's kind of niggling in my mind a little bit, and I support this motion, and I don't think we need to deal with it now, but I guess I just want us to think about, this is only going to apply to new uses. Existing tenants, their parking calculations were already decided at C of O, but maybe you're, it's sort of, if you think about it, it's not very fair, right? Because you're an existing tenant, and you have to provide this parking, and now here's a new, maybe similar business that can take that same parking and put a better use on, make better use out of it, perhaps. Like maybe you can provide outdoor dining that an existing tenant wouldn't be able to provide because they need to provide parking. So I'm just noting that. Obviously, any existing business was able to open, so providing that parking was doable for them, even if it maybe wasn't easy. But I do think about when it comes to them being competitive with other new uses that are opening in the city that might have a wider array of options for how they might be able to use that space. Am I thinking about that correctly? Because I feel like this is something that was discussed. Like if you have existing parking in the lot, can you rededicate it to some other purpose or not? I feel like that was asked either at council.
No,
or-
that's part of the zoning approval, right, to open. So if you're already approved for that parking rate, you're stuck with that. So this amendment applies specifically to buildings changing use. And so any new uses coming in where they wouldn't be able to open under the current parking code. So any existing uses, right, would have to, are required to maintain the parking they are currently using.
So let's say there's a new use and it wants to open in a building that has 6 parking spaces provided. Because they wouldn't be requested or required to provide any parking if they're, 1,000 square feet or 1,500, whatever we decide on. Would that mean that those 6 spaces, they could turn into outdoor dining and not used for parking?
If there, can you say that again? There's an existing
So
building
an
with 6
existing
cents?
building, and it's not, if it's not required to provide any parking, could it, and there is parking available in the building, could they use that parking for something else? Which is something that I would personally support. Maybe that wouldn't be the decision a business would make, but I'd much rather see, patios, like outdoor dining for like what, we
Wouldn't
have.
that be between them and their landlord then, at that point?
It might be,
The city is
yeah,
said,
Yeah.
You've met our needs, so. you
yeah.
know.
Yeah, as long as there's not any existing use that, was able to open due to the parking, and just because they're not using it, but was, met that requirement in order to open, just because, say a business did open and, under the current code, they realistically do only use 2 spaces, but maybe they have 10 that are never touched.
Right.
They still are required to keep those parking spaces under
If they're-
because of zoning,
Yeah, if they're there. Okay.
But there is, and I'm not as familiar with the outdoor dining ordinance. I know that does provide for some, obviously, outdoor space to be converted
Right.
into other uses, so,
So maybe there's some flexibility there.
Yeah.
Anyway.
and the zoning administrator, I know, does have a lot of discretion under that, so that's also what's being kept here, is that the zoning administrator would be able to review any additional parking requests.
Yeah. I guess my concern is just insofar as it's an advantage to new businesses that are opening in the city to not have to provide the parking. I would like, ideally, those same advantages be available to the existing businesses. I don't want to have different, I think we're going to go with that, like sort of different requirements for existing and new businesses, but that's also a way to test this out and see what happens.
Another reason why this is interim.
Yeah. Interim, how do you mean interim?
Well, I
Like-
mean, if we're going to do an overall parking study, hopefully we
Oh, right.
would
Address
capture
that. Mm-hmm.
that type of a fairness issue and come up with a code that treats everybody, the same.
Yeah.
Raises a good question, though. It's like, so what about the landlord of one of these buildings? Yeah, that is a good question, because the ordinance doesn't really say that. You got to be careful, because it doesn't say it only applies to new businesses. It talks about applying for a CO. But I don't know. I think you got to be careful, because I don't know. Like, let's say a landlord wants to, says, okay, well, now I could convert a few extra spaces on my property to something else, or I could build an addition, because now I could park it. I have lesser parking requirement. Would they be able to do that? Or like, for example, I don't know how every use is parked in the city, but some of our buildings that have like some restaurant uses in there, plus office, plus other things, and then it turns over. Could they then, I don't know. You might want to be specific about that. Like give a date, an effective date, and say, COs issued as of the effective date of the ordinance. And then, to make it clear that this is a forward-looking thing only, and make sure the city attorney's okay with that. Because it's true. Normally, it's okay to have exemption clauses and all kinds of stuff that explain how, when an ordinance is effective and what it means for, like, somebody in process, right? Or like, let's say, for example, like the jewelry store that we just saw that came in for site plan. I don't know where they are in their process, but they're an eligible building. Could they expand their building now and then not, they don't, have to- they could lose a parking space or two? I don't know. They don't have a C of O yet. So you just got to be clear about like that kind of stuff. It's like, those are the kind of things that always can foul you up on the back end. So there needs to be an effective date and a way you're going to handle folks in process. You know, like for new construction or people that are, you know, because a couple of those buildings I think fall into that based on the map.
Yeah, I remember having conversations around, towards the beginning, we had in mind about, we knew that the most vulnerable buildings were the oldest ones, and so age was certainly a consideration. We were advised by the city attorney that we couldn't, there was some kind of legal hangup that prohibited us from putting like new construction versus existing, and so kind of thinking about how can we, again, kind of help the existing buildings. We introduced the kind of site plan. So, a lot of new buildings new construction are approved, obviously under the site plan ordinance, and that's where, you get a lot of the parking reductions approved, under the current code. So that's why that language was included in there for ineligibility criteria. If you have an existing parking reduction tied to a site plan, thinking that more often than not, that's related to new construction.
So we're saying we don't want it to apply to new construction? Let's say one of these older sites decides they want to now do an addition, and expand because they could convert some of their parking lot. Do they get to do that?
Well, not that we don't,
They're going to get new COs when they're done, so the way it's written, wouldn't that apply to them?
Well, yeah, I mean, any existing building, so any building that turns over theoretically would be subject to the parking reduction, as, again, assuming they can meet all the other criteria, but we know that we have a lot of older, smaller commercial retail buildings, and so this was kind of meant with them in mind.
No, I understand what we meant.
Yeah.
The road to many places is paved with good intentions, but we need to be careful about how it's written, because the way it's written is how it's going to work, regardless of what staff or council or the commission thinks we mean. If it doesn't say it, it doesn't say it. So I just think because it's kind of vague, like it talks about applying for COs, but COs can be part of that's the last step for new construction is you get your CO. So let's say one of these sites wanted to demolish their building and build new. I don't know, couldn't they take advantage of it? I'm just saying we should be clear about what we're talking about. I don't think we can limit it, actually, to just existing buildings. I mean, maybe there's a way to say, as buildings existing as of this date, it applies, buildings existing as of the date of adoption, but it doesn't say anything like that.
Why don't we put that in our motion then? Just say, recommend staff include an effective date.
Or for existing buildings, I mean, whatever we mean, but I understand like the genesis of this idea was to help these older buildings, but it doesn't mean that it might not induce. I just think of an example, so I always bring up the county, it's because I spend a lot of time there, but the county just did a huge, overhaul of their parking requirements, and, called Parking Reimagined, where they actually pretty much across 95% of the use categories reduced the parking rate. But, what we're seeing, and generally it's been well received, but it certainly in some instances has induced some new construction. It's induced owners who now can convert areas that are being used as a parking lot to new, to expand. Like, for example, like I'm working on a project right now for an assisted living facility that now no longer has a lower parking rate, and that wants to add like 50 beds because they can, because they don't have to worry about the parking requirement. They can still meet the parking. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. We're working on it, but
I would say that's a good thing.
Yeah, maybe it's a good thing.
It's good for the city's coffers.
And maybe that's good.
More businesses.
Maybe that's good,
more
but we
use.
don't say
Better
that.
use than a parking
Yeah,
piece of asphalt.
And that's a policy decision. Yeah, I'm not making like a policy judgment on that, but I'm just saying that's like, it's induced a lot of, some of that, which is good, but we're not really saying that here as far as like, whether or not it applies. I hear staff saying, well, no, it doesn't apply to that. It doesn't say if you have a site plan, it doesn't apply, right? It just says if you're subject to a previous site plan, that required you to have X number of spaces. So I guess it's saying if you have an existing site plan on record, you don't get to like modify that.
Right.
I think the right question is,
Maybe we want to.
Maybe we want to. I mean, the more you talk about it, the more I think, yeah, that would be okay. I mean, if some, I guess I'm putting the onus on the business to know what its most likely path to success is. You know, if they've got an old building, they want to tear it down and replace it with a building which has got a whole bunch of 1,000-square-foot office spaces, and they don't want to have as much parking because they think some number of those are going to be used by people who live down the street and are setting up their counseling business or their tutoring business or whatever in these small offices and won't need parking for staff, which is really, that's the big area that, we do sometimes miss on, like with the Kensington, we should have been more aware that staff parking needed to be provided for shift workers coming and going in the middle of the night. At any rate, if a business thinks it can, succeed, then, and this helps in some way to do that with less parking, then I'd be okay with that. I mean, the real-world examples that we have here in the city, or you've mentioned them, Northside Social and Tingeria and Godfrey's. I mean, I'm always first question I ask anybody who goes anywhere in town is, were you able to find a place to park? Because I'm sensitive to this now. And so my spouse today went to Godfrey's for a late lunch, and at 2 o'clock, the parking lot was full. But, apparently that's okay with them. They're doing good business, I guess. And that parking situation there, when we allowed that use, was a little edgy. Northside Social certainly was controversial. It came in with a historical designation, and therefore Planning Commission waived the traditional parking requirements. And then we found, I don't know, at least 30% more spaces on the street than we'd ever had before. And people find a way. Tingeria was a difficult situation for, I don't know, several months, but it seems to have worked itself out. So I don't know.
Would this have applied to that? So would this ordinance have helped that circumstance? Would it have applied? It would have, right?
Northside?
No, not Tingeria. That was an existing building.
Right, yeah.
So at least they wouldn't have had to count the first 1,000.
There's an existing building changing use, and so, yeah, it would be
They don't
subject
even really
to
have
that.
1,000 square feet.
They're
They would have had
tiny.
zero requirement.
And I mean, yeah, I'm sure they could make a very nice use of the
But
parking
it
lot.
also speaks to the equity thing as far as like, so now they had to they had to go through a lot of
They had to bend
gymnastics
over backwards
to do it.
to
And
get
now,
Yeah.
I don't know. It raises a lot of questions about
Well,
that.
there's a lot of things like
But there's
that.
bigger questions just generally, as Mr. Stevens noted earlier, about parking in general. So I don't know that we'll get this perfect, because I think there's a lot more bigger things to discuss.
Well, as part of our recommendation, I think we do need to lay out, well, at least what we feel, how it should apply as far as like, is this just prospective, or is it the new law of the
effective
land?
date and-
Yeah, is this the new law of the land, and everyone gets to take advantage of it if they meet the criteria? Or is it only, I think, honestly, that's probably the better way to do it, is have it be for anybody, who meets the criteria. That's a non-residential use, the first 1,000 square, in less than 20,000 square foot building, whatever, you meet all the criteria. I don't know if we want to limit it only to prospective. Why would we want to do that?
No, I think you make a good point.
Yeah.
So is the language in the alternative resolution consistent with what you've just heard in that regard?
The only difference in the alternative is the exception number.
Yeah, right, that was my impression, which, if you'll call it up, I'd be happy to make a motion if asked. If we,
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. I mean, we may have some discussion on the motion.
yeah, right, I mean, we don't have to, but.
In some ways, this should just be the new rate, and so that's what it is. Like, if you meet this criteria, this is
It would
your
be
new-
simpler, and I guess the
your new
onus
rate.
would be on if council agrees that existing businesses who would meet these criteria should also be eligible, then the onus would just be on them.
Yeah, I'd like to hear council debate, discuss this just as we have, because I
Right,
think
they'll
that
need
would
to do
be
Well,
helpful.
is the thought that demarcation was put in there to limit
Limit the
the
potential
application of
impact.
this?
Well, I think I'm unclear about which eligibility criteria specifically.
So I think the way you all have it written here is that it applies to new businesses that are opening in the city in
Correct.
existing buildings. And
Correct.
what we're
Oh, you're talking
saying-
about existing. that
Existing
could-
buildings that would meet these criteria, if they had opened tomorrow, or
Mhm.
whenever this ordinance is passed, they wouldn't have had to provide the parking that they've already done, and so should they be also allowed?
Actually,
But I guess yeah, and La Tangria is a good,
Like, where are they providing parking? Like, because some businesses may be like paying, or they had to go through some, I don't know what they're doing. They had a weird circumstance, but
North Side is renting those spaces, and that's a business decision that they made,
you didn't require that there.
It
yeah.
was not required. And Godfrey's is
Godfrey's
doing
is doing
valet
valet parking.
parking.
Yeah.
Did we
So those
require
are
that?
business.
Was that
No,
required? No.
No, this is the
That was a
thing, the
tenant.
market is
Yeah,
working.
that was a tenant in an
working it
existing
out.
building, right?
Yeah.
They were over 20,000 square feet, that building, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think with that, when you have buildings that are, tied to a site plan or were approved under a site plan, then you might you run into issues where you have to amend the site plan potentially when you're talking about parking. So it's,
Because that was a significant renovation. Was there a site plan for Godfrey's?
No, there wasn't.
Although,
that
actually,
might
what
just
you have
have
it
been a
written,
grading plan.
you don't limit it only to a site plan. You have a written site plan with a TDM and a parking plan, which most of the newer buildings are going to have some kind of TDM, but the older ones wouldn't. They'll have a site plan, but they won't have a TDM.
Anything from the last 10 years.
So I don't know if that's
right,
intentional.
but the site plan could have been approved under, the current parking standards, so when you're changing that,
Well, like the jewelry business we just approved, whatever, I forget their name, like they're not,
Yosemite.
It's a new building altogether.
they're
though,
going to have
right?
site plan, but they have a site plan there, but they're not going to have TDM. They don't have TDM or parking, so are they eligible for this? I think the way it's written, actually, they would be.
It's not an existing building. It's a
That-
brand new
But it doesn't say that in
Right.
here.
existing building. Yeah,
Where does it say
it-
that? What line is that?
Where am I? Well, I think one
It
of.
doesn't say it in here.
There's
It
not-
doesn't say it. Oh, here you go, no, not subject to just existing off-site parking agreement. It doesn't say anything about existing buildings.
Hold on.
it's,
It's on the line 174, Jack, recommended amendment.
Where, 9.3? Wait,
174.
well, there's no new, the ordinance text is in
It's
the
got to be in the
threes.
text, yeah.
Yeah, if it's not in the text, it doesn't count. If it's not in there, that's the law. So if it's not specifically spelled out, so right now, it's actually not limited, the way I read it, to new uses. It talks about when the rate is, like, when they're getting a C of O, and I don't know if that's the best trigger, actually, the way that's written, but,
Let me go to the,
because right now, our rates are like spelled out, where are our rates? Are they like just, I know we don't have the whole ordinance printed out here, but I kind of understand how staff approach this, but in some ways it might be simpler to just like, do we have a table? I forget. How are our parking rates? Are they just listed
It's like,
in words?
how many pinball machines do you have?
I got to pull it up.
Yeah, it's
Like
in there, it's one of the.
2 spots per pinball machine or something.
I apologize. I probably would have brought up some of this stuff in August, but it's all right.
Oh, here we are.
Yeah, it's just not clear. It's just not clear how it, because it's not spelled out, existing buildings, it's not spelled out. I mean, it talks about a trigger of when you apply for a C of O. Although sometimes, a business, when they change ownership, gets a new C of O. The same business could change hands and they get a new C of O, I think. So would that apply? I think, I don't know. It may not be the best trigger. I feel like we should have a rate, and the rate should apply to the use. And that way, it's just, I think that's simpler than the way this would try to work.
What do you mean the use?
Well, like normal, we have like in this case, well, we have defined the uses we're talking about, the ones that are, right? The ordinance says ones that are
Non-residential. It's really any
non-residential.
use.
Well, non-residential that are regulated based on floor area, site area, or customer use space. Some are regulated differently. So only ones, as this is drafted, the only uses that get to do this are ones that are calculated based on their floor area, site area, or customer use space, right? Some like schools and other things. There are other non-residential uses that are like based on people, and this is not affecting them, right? This is people who are regulated based on square footage of some kind, or uses that are regulated based on square footage. So maybe it needs to be like, there just needs to be like an asterisk in the table somewhere that says, I got to pull up the ordinance to see. I forget how we have it listed.
It's one of the attachments.
Or is it?
Computer.
No, I know. I want to pull up the actual adopted ordinance the way it is today. Is it in there? No. Is it in our attachments? No, it's not. you understand what I'm saying, Mr. Trainer? Like what I'm getting at? Because the way it's worded now, it's kind of awkward, and I don't know, like, I think practically speaking, you may run into trouble applying this. Like, if you try to tell somebody they're not eligible to use this, they might say, well, I don't know, that's not how I read it. I mean, I feel like you don't want to be ambiguous. It's a little ambiguous, actually. And if we know what we want, then we should just be as transparent and clear as possible, so.
So maybe the first thing is, one, the use is an existing building.
If that's what we want, I don't think I want that, actually. The more we've been talking and thinking out loud here.
You think you want it to apply, yeah.
Apply to the whole, wherever, I don't, what's the difference?
If we don't
it's an
speak to
existing
this,
building? Yeah.
if by default, the understanding is it's any building,
Yeah, that's
I'm
just
okay
fine
with
me.
that.
So what are the changes that you would want to see?
Well, I want to pull up the rest of the code. Like, we only have a snippet here. I want to pull up the rest of it so I can see, like, how this fits in with, like, how we list the other rates and, because we didn't, I don't know. And I apologize for doing this in real time, Mr. Trainer. I don't know, like, I hate to, like, defer this, but I don't know.
Can't, I think it's going to council at the end of the month, so this, it's sort of
Right, yeah, they
an hour
need a
number.
recommendation, so,
Well,
yeah.
I don't believe in that. I mean, council can always, there's not, we've had this, we've had these parking regulations in effect for decades. How long has it been like this? For 50 years? Is another couple of weeks gonna change anything for anybody? I don't know, if we can't get it right.
That's how we ended up with the carpet store at the corner for 45 years.
Well, the point is, like, we want to get it right.
We never could seem to find the right 2 weeks to make it move
I mean-
until we
I
did.
thought your concern was with the sort of existing building qualifier, but it's not. It sounds like it's not. So what is because maybe I'm not following where
Well,
you are now.
I guess my concern is that if staff seems to be under the impression that it would only apply prospectively, I don't agree, first of all, I don't think it's written that way, but I also don't agree that that should be the intent. And I think that they shouldn't trigger it by saying use is applying for a C of O. I mean, it should just, the same way parking is regulated today, if you're a use, you have a rate. And, yes, when it's enforced at the time you apply for your C of O. But if we change the rate, like, what if we didn't do any of this? What if we just went into and I apologize, I'm trying to pull up the code so I can actually see how we,
Well, and we
I've looked
may
at it
not
in a while.
necessarily have to write the code here. I think if we put in the end result that we recommend be included in the final code amendment, and then let the city attorney and Mr. Stoddard, draft the language that achieves
well,
that.
I think we need to see the language. I think that's our job as the planning commission, is to make recommendations on the zoning ordinance, and then council adopts it. I mean, that's what we're here for. We don't just, a lot of times we speak at the 10,000-foot level, but now we're talking about code. So that's part of our job too, in my opinion. I don't know. I just feel like there's some problems with the way this is written. It's just awkward. I don't know if it's going to do what we want it to do. Exactly.
It's going to do what we want it to do, and maybe even more, as I understand.
Yeah, that's
what I've
sort of what
heard.
I'm hearing, and that sounds like what you're in support of.
And as long as-
is sort of
Okay, here we go.
making this available to a wider.
Well, like right now we have a table, right? All our parking's in a table. Yeah. Why wouldn't we just, and then we have a bunch of notes at the end of the table. We have some notes and asterisks at the end of the table. I don't know. Why couldn't we just add that, for uses regulated this way, the first 1,000 square feet in a building under 20,000 square feet, whatever, doesn't count.
Isn't that how it is, though?
Well, it's
Because-
like, I guess I don't like the B, non-resident uses applying for a C of O business use
And
permit.
is it because you don't like the C of O trigger?
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't like that.
Is there a different, how did staff arrive at the C of O trigger? Is that because that's when parking is normally sort of determined?
Yeah, right, when they come in for the certificate of occupancy, that's what triggers the zoning review.
And so did you all contemplate like a situation where there might be an existing business who would come in, who would say, hey, I hear we have these new parking regulations, like, can you reevaluate my parking? Did you talk about that potential use case?
Yeah, so they would still be subject to what they were approved under, though. So this is, meant to be a relief valve for, existing buildings, so,
And we also have the relief valve of the zoning administrator, right?
Right.
And that was originally, you had contemplated striking that, but we've restored it.
correct.
So the zoning administrator, I think, also has the ability to make a ruling, and I think that's the case
For
today.
non-conforming parking.
non-conforming.
Specifically, yeah.
So would we want to expand that to existing uses? I mean, if they're not coming in for a C of O? I mean, to Mr. Krasner's point,
For existing, so what the current requirement is where no specific use is stated or where existing parking is non-conforming. That's when the zoning administrator has the discretion to provide relief. So it's talking about non-conforming parking, so an existing building where there's not enough parking to accommodate a prospective new use.
But if they're conforming today, I think that's the situation.
So that's weird, though. Yeah, so, okay, that was proposed to be deleted, and now it's back.
Correct.
And it's back, who asked for it to come back?
I don't know if this kind of came out of additional conversations with staff and the zoning administrator, and thinking about that this would add additional flexibility and kind of build on that relief valve for existing uses. There's not a lot of, relief for current uses, so.
Just playing devil's advocate, wouldn't that one phrase then allow the zoning administrator to wouldn't that obviate the need for any of this? Couldn't the zoning administrator say to any business, this is my policy is now this, and so I'll determine that, anyone who's the first 1,000 feet don't count? I mean, I don't understand, that's actually, we have that in there. So I don't know. I just, that's
Sure.
okay to give the zoning administrator that kind of power. That's a lot of power, actually, to give the zoning administrator, because in theory, they could use that to say that no parking is needed anywhere,
Right, it's kind of the one,
some complaints about that.
or existing parking. Or I
The
guess,
city manager would hear
well,
about that.
well, only when it's not conforming. I guess for any building that doesn't have enough, they could say, yeah, it's true, they might, but the ordinance wouldn't preclude it, I don't know. So initially, what was the idea about deleting that? Where did that come from? When staff drafted?
So, yeah, part of the consideration, in addition to offering, flexibility to the smallest, again, most vulnerable businesses, is this phrase here, again, which gives the zoning administrator a lot of power and discretion. Part of it was meant to take that kind of weight off of the zoning administrator or one single staff person in making these kind of decisions. So by putting this in front of that, you're creating a new standard and sort of perhaps, for the smallest uses, perhaps eliminating the need to go to the zoning administrator at all. But for those that, are requesting additional parking, it maybe gives the zoning administrator a better leg to stand on, more data to consider such a request.
Okay, so you might want to, and that's okay. It is a lot of power to give the zoning administrator, but it's been that way for a long time anyway. But you might want to say where B does not apply. Because if we want B, if we're going to leave it in this format, for example, right, if you go, right, the draft, right, that's under, you inserted a new,
Line
B.
377. if you
well, right, so
scroll
now
up.
under 481003, we're adding a new B. So you might want to say then in C, where no specific requirement is stated for the use, or where B does not apply, and the existing parking is non-conforming. Because we're saying for situations where B is going to apply, we don't want the zoning administrator to substitute his or her opinion or judgment. It would almost seem like they'd have an option. They could try to go under B, or they could ask the zoning administrator. You might want to, I think we should be clear that if we're going to go through all this trouble, that's what we want to rule the day, not the zoning administrator to substitute their judgment for B, because we're being very deliberate and specific about that.
So the thinking is to have businesses subject to either B or C, but not have the ability
Not
to
both.
request additional relief from the zoning administrator.
So the actual text change, would that
Right.
be under C, Mr. Krasner, where no specific requirement is stated for a use or where B does not apply?
Yeah.
Where the
I would say.
requirements of subsection B do
Yeah,
not apply?
I would say where no specific requirement is stated for a use, or
Or-
where B does not apply and the existing parking is non-conforming, because we still want to keep it, it's only going to apply to non-conforming properties.
I think it should still be an or, though, right?
Yeah, it'd be an or, but it'd be or where B does not apply and, because then.
And, yeah.
Because we want B to.
So it's where B
rule.
does not apply and no specific requirement is stated for use or existing parking is
Isn't
non-conforming.
that what we're trying to do? Because otherwise, what's the point? Otherwise, the zoning administrator could say, I'm going to give them the first 5,000 square feet off because I just think that that's appropriate. I'm playing devil's advocate.
How does that work internally in the office? I mean, a frontline CO reviewer would have authority beyond what the zoning administrator herself would have, as I would interpret that. Is that wise? Is that really
Well, so the zoning administrator alone currently has the power to hear parking relief for existing non-conforming parking. And then the zoning shop or whoever's reviewing the certificate of occupancies would be, it'd be part of their duty to, again, just looking through a regular CO submission to apply the proposed 1,000 square foot reduction. So there's no judgment call in that scenario, whereas today, the zoning administrator does have discretion over such petitions.
Right.
So again, by kind of structuring it ahead of that, we're kind of offering a streamlined path to some relief, saying, you don't have to spend and time and resources to put together a parking reduction petition, which you do under C when you have to request the zoning administrator review. We're offering, what the proposal does is, offered a kind of certainty about if you meet the criteria, then there's no question about whether anything is going to get in your way of that. But if you need further relief, then you can request that from the zoning administrator by submitting 1 through 9.
And that's how it would play out if we made no changes in the resolution that you
As written, that's the process.
How often does that happen? How often does the zoning administrator deny these requests? Do we know? I mean, how often this is occurring?
We don't have hard data on that, but just from talking to her, it's a really rare occurrence. I'm not sure that she's actually used this before.
Yeah, I was wondering. Although with I hate to keep bringing La Tenria, but I think that's kind of what happened there, right? That was a previous zoning administrator, but didn't the zoning administrator get involved in that?
They were approved as a carryout, which required less parking, I think, than maybe what people
Okay, so
ended
they didn't
up
do this.
thinking.
They didn't take advantage of this.
No, their parking is conforming. They're providing what was
Yeah, the remedy
required.
was just signage, I think was the only thing they had to do.
Yeah.
One other thought on this lack of fairness, because existing businesses, it seems to me the remedy is really not that difficult. If I have a business that's already in place and now I want to take advantage of this, I could just simply go to an attorney and say, make me up as a new business. I'll go in, I file a new C of O, and I'm
But why
off
make someone
under
go
the-
through that rigmarole if we could just make it clear? Like, why make someone do that?
But if
Well,
they
I'm
already
okay-
have.
I'm okay with that too, maybe it's a first choice, but I'm just saying there is a remedy.
Sure.
So it's not an outright discrimination as I see it, so.
Yeah, and maybe it depends on the business, but if you already have the parking, then, maybe there's an advantage about where, an existing business could use that space for something else, but,
And they also may want the parking.
right, if they already have the parking.
just as a
Yeah, I
practical.
mean, just thinking about a place like La Tangria, I know they tried to build like a nice little patio right on Lee Highway, and that certainly would be nicer a little bit farther away from that highway. So, yeah, I want people to make the best use of the space that they have. In some cases, that will be parking for their business. In other cases, that might be outdoor dining. So I just want people to have the flexibility.
Advocate again that I think it's a good idea for the planning commission to approve in the motion something about a follow-up report where some of these things could be studied and observed a little bit, and then if there's the thought or movement to amend, whatever's approved tonight, then that can happen.
I'm comfortable with this as is and applying to new businesses, and then maybe in a year we can see, and you can also inform us about whether there's interest from existing businesses or confusion about it, or feeling of unfairness.
I think for me, it's real simple. We could just strike, instead, the first part of B, non-residential uses applying for a C of O business use permit shall be exempt. Just strike that up to the word from, strike that, and then the becomes capital T. The first 1,000 square feet of contributing floor area when calculating off-street parking requirements, we would add is exempt or, provided. you know, and then 1, 2, 3.
For non-residential, you need to keep the non-residential uses, but
Right.
you would just remove the C of O as the trigger, is what you're
Yeah,
proposing.
I'm saying, why don't we just, right, I mean, to me, that, I don't want to distinguish between someone who comes in, has the fortune of, you know, applying for a C of O
After we've
in
approved this.
December versus someone who's going through the process right now, because we haven't
Mm-hmm.
been clear about when it kicks in. So I don't know, to me, that, like, that's just the way we
Well,
should
I guess
do
they've
it.
already made the necessary sort of decisions to be able to provide the parking if they are existing or sort of on their way to becoming an existing business.
Right, but like, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I know, and we can't,
And there may not be that many people taking advantage of it. What would be the downside of removing that C of O trigger?
So, I mean, that was sort of the trigger about how this would be administered. Because again, we're talking about non-conforming parking, so we're talking about, again, existing parking and non-conforming uses to that parking. So, getting rid of that,
it doesn't say that, though. It doesn't say it only applies to non-conforming, does it? It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that.
It doesn't, no, I don't think that's what Mr. Trainer means. I think
That's for,
we're exempting these businesses from parking requirements in a way that might make them non-conforming. Is that kind of what you mean?
right, yeah,
Mr. Trainer?
right.
I just think it should apply. I think we're lowering the rate. I think if we want to experiment with this, let's lower the rate for the first 1,000 square feet. They don't, you know, they get that bonus that these uses don't have to count the first 1,000 square feet, wherever these uses operate in the city. We don't need the language about the C of O. That's implied. That's part of the, that's in some other part of the code. I mean, the parking rates, they're in the table right now are being enforced, you know, the same way. So we don't need to call this out separately. It'd be the same thing. So you guys wouldn't do business any differently than you're doing it today, but it's just that way there's no confusion. It just applies. That's the rate. And so, you know, and maybe that is practically speaking what someone has to do to, you know, because, right, their C of O, what does it say, their parking requirement on the C of O? No. It just says, what does it say on the C of O? Sometimes actually it does, right? Doesn't the C of O give an occupancy sometimes, right? It gives like a capacity, it gives, I know that, like,
So you would just have it say, non-residential uses shall be exempt from the first 1,000 square feet of contributing floor area, provided blah, 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 all the
Right.
rest.
yeah, exactly.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with making that recommendation, and then I think that, I don't know how substantive a change that would be. I mean, I think we might need to have our city attorney weigh in on that change, and council will have to contemplate it. I mean, because the thing is it will open this up to potentially more existing businesses, which I think we agree could be a good thing in the
It's not
interest of
clear.
fairness.
It's just not clear. That's the problem now, is that even though the intent is that it only apply to new, it's not written that way. So I don't know, like, you know, people like Mr. Stevens just said, you could people could try to get around that
It's
very
pretty
easily.
easy to
But I think
formulate
you're
an-
arguing for everybody to be eligible anyway,
So
so
that's
even,
just like taking
Even
any ambiguity.
new
That's just-
buildings.
No, I'm arguing that it
Not
should
new
just-
buildings,
We're just
no.
we're gonna, in effect, lower the rate in these specific circumstances. The rate on those uses, which you've laid out, the ones that are,
I see.
that are defined by customer space, floor area, or site area, that they don't, the first 1,000 square feet for those uses doesn't count.
Because there was no analysis by staff, was there, that looked at existing businesses and thought through whether or not
And
applying
the 20,000
these
square
reductions
foot
would cause a
limit and all
problem?
that.
That didn't come
Just
up.
the CEOs for spaces to get a sense of, you know,
Right.
the
Well,
individual tenant spaces.
Right, but I mean, just thinking through, you know, problems that might arise if you had existing businesses come in and say, oh, I want to now have this new reduced parking requirement apply to me. There was no analysis of that, was there?
Correct. There's been no study about existing businesses decreasing their parking.
so I guess if we confine it to just new businesses, then it's supported by the analysis that staff has done so far, and it's a way to kind of tiptoe into this and see what the effects are. And then maybe in a year, when staff comes and reports to us, we could expand it further.
If we want to limit to new businesses, then we need to say that explicitly. It doesn't say that. I'm not going to vote for it this way because it doesn't say that.
So non-residential uses applying for a C of O. So like what you're saying is that
mean,
just apply, the virtue of
That's the same new
applying.
businesses. An existing business could just change their name and like legally, like they decide they're going to be called, they're going to, that happens all the time. They change a name, they change ownership, they get a new C of O. It's the father sells to a son and he gets a new C of O, but it's the same business. Like the customer doesn't even really realize it's any different, but they get a new C of O.
Well,
So-
I'm okay with applying it across the board, since there's no analysis by staff that shows that applying it to existing businesses is going to create a problem. We may as well just make it clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the way this was phrased is the thinking is that when a building gets approved at the site plan level, it's you state what the zoning program is, and so you're required to provide enough parking according to what it gets approved at its site plan. So when
Doesn't
it,
say that. Doesn't
Well-
say that. It only says if you have a site plan with a parking, with TDM or a parking management plan, if just a plain old fashioned site plan would be allowed to use this, the way I read it.
right, but
Change that.
Right.
I guess the thinking is when an individual comes in for a certificate of occupancy, you already have a building that's been approved regardless of whether it's new or old, right? The parking is fixed, so the certificate of occupancy process kind of assumes that it's an existing building.
It may, maybe not. I mean, what if the owner wants to, I don't know. I don't
you-
like it this way.
Are you concerned about the existing versus new building or existing versus new business?
Well, my main concern is that it's ambiguous. And then we can talk about whether, we can try to get to a consensus about what we think it should say. But right now, it's ambiguous about whether it applies only to new businesses, and only to new, or, and doesn't apply to, existing construction. It's just, or new construction. It's just not clear. We don't say it. So if we want it to be very narrow, then we would need to add some wording in here that restricts it to only those situations where it's an existing building,
Can we say,
no new construction.
okay, so then
I don't
in,
know if we want that. Ironically, I think I'm being more liberal here
I
on the
know you
parking issue
are.
than you guys.
Yeah,
Why don't we just try? What do we,
Yeah.
why not just do it? I mean,
well, it's different than what I think council, it's significant, and
Well,
I'm in agreement with you.
council-
I kind of raised it myself, but like,
that's why it comes to the commission for us
Yeah.
to provide an opinion. I mean. there-
why not apply it to all of them? Then they can have the same debate.
And I didn't listen to the council's entire debate. I don't know.
Well, again, we're not
if
aware of any
They intentionally wanted
analysis.
to limit this or not. I think staff maybe put this forward, but I don't know if council said, we're really worried about it. We only want it to apply in this way.
And we've got no analysis before us that shows that applying it to existing businesses creates a problem.
Well, I know, but there's no analysis period, so it could create a problem. We just wouldn't know that
Well-
because staff didn't do the research, right? So that's my concern.
And the other alternate would be to defer it, let staff come back with more data if we want them to do some more work on that and come back and provide us with some additional information to, substantiate if people have concerns. I'm not concerned about it. I think that it's not as big a change as maybe
I
some folks
think-
might think, but
There are a lot of people that would, I don't know what other use, many of these, like depending on the business that you have, like maybe you would add some outdoor dining or something like that, but most of these businesses, if they have parking, they're probably going to want to keep it, I don't know
most
what
of
else.
the time,
you
not
would-
always though. You'd be surprised. I mean, it depends. You never know. But I guess I'm willing to see what happens if we want to allow, more flexibility and try to encourage some activity on these, to allow these smaller uses. Again, it's only applying, under the 20,000 square foot building. I mean, there still are some safeguards in place, that on these small, relatively, not tiny buildings, but smaller buildings,
So
for
I-
these particular uses, it's only for those particular uses, although
I think there are two like small changes that we could make to sort of align this with the direction that you want it to go in. The change that you recommended earlier for B, which is striking part of that first sentence, so it would be non-residential uses shall be exempt from the first 1,000 square feet of contributing floor area, right? So you just eliminate the C of
that
O.
works.
So that sort of addresses the non-residential uses, any non-residential use. And then I think for the existing building thing, maybe in 1, the building that the non-residential use will occupy is an existing building, not subject to an existing off-site parking agreement. So not a new building, or do you want it to apply to a new building? Because if not, then I think you can just strike the C of O
Yeah.
as a trigger and we can be good
Well,
with it.
That work. I mean, I don't know what if, like I said, I'm not looking to be difficult and like make it harder than it needs to be. If folks are more comfortable with only allowing this to apply to existing buildings, that's fine. And if we say that, then at least then it's clear. And that can be the experiment, that we're limiting it only to existing buildings, existing as of the date of adoption.
I
of this
think that
thing.
my sense is that staff would probably be more comfortable with that because that's the analysis that they've done so far,
I'm
and
not
that's
as
the
worried about staff being
recommendation.
comfortable. I like that to be
Well,
comfortable. That's not my main
I would,
priority.
I would also be more comfortable because that's the
Hear more about that.
analysis. The analysis that staff has done so far is sort of like with this pool of businesses in mind, right? They haven't really looked at like what could, how many potential businesses could be eligible that are already existing in the community. And like I said, my expectation is it would be a small number of those would come in and say, I'm going to put outdoor dining in my parking lot. But it could happen. So, it's a different analysis and we don't have that information.
I'd be okay with what you just proposed. Deleting
For
the,
removing the C of O trigger.
and then putting it specifically saying existing buildings.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. So for the outdoor dining piece, I mean, I'm a little bit confused because we already have an outdoor dining method
We do.
for that.
Yeah, it's
So
true.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
What
Like,
else?
what
people-
other- what
What
other-
other uses people might find for their parking
Right.
spaces? Well, I guess, would it be the business finding the use, or would it be the landlord potentially finding the use?
That's what would happen. The landlord.
That kind of is another question, is how would that be
The owner.
administered and who would be in
Well,
charge
For
of that?
example, like a landlord could then say, I'm going to build a 900 square foot addition and rent that out to a new business. He won't have it.
Which maybe that-
I don't have to add any parking, in order to do that. I could, maybe he needs to take away a spot or two because now he could make it work. I don't know. Yeah, that could happen.
Yeah.
And that's an existing building.
But
With
that,
addition,
the addition would be new.
we didn't say that.
The building would be existing.
We didn't say only to existing square footage, only for like, GFA existing today. I don't know. It gets kind of hard to limit it that way. I don't know. But
Yep, I just worry we're, getting out of the scope without triggering a new first reading. I know that's,
So, can we include in our motion, which Mr. Duncan made a little while ago, do you want to make an amendment for those
did we make a
two?
motion? I don't understand.
I don't- yeah.
Yes, we have a motion on the table.
I'm
and-
sorry,
and
I'm
a
like losing
second.
track of where
Oh.
we are.
No, that's okay.
Mr. Duncan made a motion as prepared by staff.
The
Okay.
alternative.
The alternative motion, which is on,
Which is the 1,500 square feet,
which is on page what?
Allowed by law.
or, yeah,
I apologize, I'm losing track of where we are in the order of business here.
But you didn't read all of the whereases, though, yet,
No.
right? Yeah.
That's why, I didn't hear all the whereases.
Oh, I see. Maybe
So-
you just said you were going to make a motion. and
I,
I've lost
well,
the-
I'm.
Okay.
Attendant to that was the long dogging me question, why do we have to go through the whole whereas rigmarole? Why can't we just cut to the chase
kinda-
and say, now
Thank you.
therefore I
You
move?
can say whatever you want, there's no law about what a motion needs to be.
I mean, assuming that the legislative language is included in what's transmitted on to the council,
You can say whatever you'd like, Mr. Duncan.
is the city attorney going to get on us if we don't read the whole
Well, it's nice.
preamble to the Constitution?
But we've never been
The record,
advised.
people who are watching. I
Um,
don't know. Do you want me to read it?
What do
I'm
they-
happy to read it.
What do they say in Congress, approve this as if read. I mean, I can read the whole thing if you want, but the final destination is where I'm still not clear that we're landing. So is there anything that needs to be added by our vote, or are we just giving guidance to staff that in the legislative language underlying the resolution,
I thought we were gonna, make.
the discussion
I
that
think there
we've
were
had
two
is
points,
reflected?
the sort of removing CVO as the trigger and clarifying that this applies to existing buildings. Those would be the recommendations, Mr. Krasner?
Yeah, we'll read it out to staff so they know what we want to strike.
Well, let's,
And,
how about we read it out first so that whatever motion I make is,
Okay.
Right,
includes
I
that?
think a motion needs to be made, seconded, and then
And then we
discussion.
can do discussion, yeah, so,
by amendment.
Okay, all right, if you insist. So do I have to read all the whereases just for kicks?
It's up to you.
Whereas the city council in its calendar year, 2024-25 priorities work plan established certain goals for the city of Falls Church, including promoting efficient use of parking, being more business friendly, and encouraging and supporting transportation alternatives to single occupancy vehicles, and whereas excessive off-street parking requirements can present challenges for small and independent businesses seeking to open in existing commercial buildings with a fixed on-site parking supply, and whereas reducing the off-street parking requirements for existing commercial buildings, there's that word existing, encourages their reuse by expanding the number of allowable commercial uses to occupy the building. Now, therefore, I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the commercial parking ordinance reduction and recommend that the exempt space be 1,500 square feet or in the alternative, the highest square footage under 1,500 square feet allowed by law.
I can second.
All right, so now,
So now we're discussing. So the
discussion?
language that I just read includes the word existing commercial buildings, so
But if to Mr. Krasner's point, if it needs to be clear in the code, in the proposed
right, the
code.
whereases don't hold any legal weight.
then why did I just read them?
They
I mean,
might,
is that a dumb question?
Voice, Mr.
well, they
Duncan.
might, I don't know, I'm not an attorney, but they might help in the case of like somebody somewhere, not us, looking back to try to understand what we or the council did.
I mean, it says proposed motion, and therefore it seems to me like every word in it carries the full weight, and therefore if you want existing out, then you shouldn't have it in the
Well,
third paragraph.
It sounds like, based on the discussion we had, I'm personally okay with limiting it to existing buildings, but we do, in order to make sure that that in fact will happen, I think we need to adjust the language in the proposed code the way we just discussed. So if we
Okay,
want to make it,
so-
I mean, I'll make a friendly,
So your friendly amendment will
I'll make a
speak to
friendly
that.
amendment to amend, so it's your motion, but it's to adopt the, let me see how it's worded here, so we can do this properly. To recommend approval of the commercial parking ordinance reduction, and recommend that the exempt space be 1,500. We can leave it as it is, and with the following revisions to the draft text. And then we can, and then getting down to the draft text, in little under, all right, starting under little, paragraph little b, under 481003, non-residential uses, we keep that, and then we strike applying for a certificate of occupancy business use permit. So we strike that. So now it reads, non-residential uses shall be exempt from the first 1,000 square feet of contributing floor area when calculating off-street parking requirements provided. And then, I'm sorry, where did you want
I
to add
think
the word
you
existing?
said the building that the non-residential use will occupy is an existing building.
There we go.
Maybe
right,
we would
right,
add that.
Right, okay, right, I'm sorry, yes, that's right. Will occupy is an existing building,
After the is, yeah.
yeah. And then delete the second is, we only need one.
Does that need a date as of?
Yeah, as of the date of
As of the
date of adoption.
date of adoption.
Of the ordinance.
Well, is that even as of, I guess we could fill in the date. I don't know that anybody will know when this amendment was made,
Well, that's why, yeah, they'll have to fill that in, right, as of the
Yeah.
date, as of the effective
of,
date of
and
the
then leave it
ordinance, or
blank.
something like that.
As of and leave it blank.
When the city council adopts an ordinance, I think there is a date on the bottom, like, that says the date they did
but
it.
it's not, it's like an amendment to the existing code, right?
Right, but
So
the date-
is that
whenever-
recorded?
Anytime the code is updated, there's usually a date and a number that goes along with the update to tell you when it happened, somewhere.
Is that available in I'm thinking about like a business owner reading this.
Yeah, no, we
and-
can,
or,
we can
you
add
know,
the date, yeah.
Yeah, just include the date
Or
there to
blank
make it
to fill in the
easy.
date as of, yeah.
We would want it to say is an existing building.
As of the date of
As
adoption.
of the
then
day of
Yeah,
adoption.
and that's like,
As of the date of
that's a
adoption.
placeholder now, yeah, for us. I mean, this is draft text, that's a placeholder. It would be filled in with the actual date.
So, as of the day of adoption for now.
Yeah, as of the
Date.
date of adoption, yeah.
As of, and I would put that, if you put that in brackets, then I think that communicates that we're trying to,
That there's
Yeah.
more to follow.
as of the
Date or date?
Date.
date of adoption, yeah.
And are you changing all references throughout the whole document, wherever they may be, from 1,000 to 1,500 as part of this?
Oh, yeah, that's right, we meant
I
to do
would-
that. I'm sorry, yeah, that's
Exercise.
right,
I mean,
of
that's
course.
the
Yeah,
recommendation.
let's do it, yeah.
Okay,
This
sure.
is our proposal. I mean,
Yeah.
council can say, I'm not listening to any of it, but.
Yeah,
But.
that's fine.
We'll tell them what we think
Your
is.
friendly amendment.
So
includes
on
doing
the
a
second line above there,
versus
Jack, we'd
search
switch
for-
the 1,000 to 1,500.
Yeah, and B,
Um,
yeah, to change it to 1,500.
Wherever else that may appear.
Yeah, I think that's it. don't
I think
it-
that's it. It's just
doesn't
that
appear
one
anywhere else.
location.
And then everything else you have in there is fine. Yeah, we're not changing anything else.
I think you've got 5,000, Jack, not 1,500.
Oh, no, he's got it.
It's there.
Yeah, you just swapped out the
It's
zero for
kind
a
of hard
five.
to see, but the one's there.
Yeah, the rest of it I think reads fine. So,
1,000, one hobby I
It was originally 1,000, so he struck out the first zero and
But it should
replaced
be
it with a 5.
1,500.
It's in red.
yeah, it's there. No, it reads, yeah, once he accepts, once the track changes are turned off, it's there.
Okay, so how do we reflect this in the
So
motion?
the motion, so again, my friendly amendment in the motion was, just as Mr. Duncan read it, but then at the end of his motion, after where it says, or allowed by law, and with the,
Following revisions
and with-
as
and-
reflected in the draft
yeah,
text below?
yeah, and with,
Or-
and with the modifications indicated in the attached draft text. We'll
Do we want to
attach-
spell out what those are? You know, like bullet one, removing C of O as the trigger and clarifying that this only applies to existing buildings, just for
Okay,
ease of
yeah,
counsel.
that's fine. Yeah, okay, and fine, and, you know, right, with the revisions, modification indicated in the attached draft text
Specifically,
Yeah,
and
specifically
then
to-
colon,
to.
and then I
delete-
think you could do just bullets,
Yeah,
like,
specifically, right, and then, right, first bullet, right, delete the certificate, the issuance of the certificate of occupancy as a trigger. And delete the issuance of the certificate of occupancy as a trigger, or application for a certificate of occupancy is what you said.
Delete the issuance, or
The application.
application.
Yeah, as the trigger. I think that's how you had it worded. Yeah, as a trigger, increase the limit to 1,500.
That's in the, I mean, we can underline it, but
Yeah,
it's in the proposed motion.
And
the exception area, or what's?
the exemption, or whatever, what are you calling
exemption.
it? Limit the exemption, or increase the exemption to the first 1,500 square feet. And. to-
Clarify that this
Yeah, to-
applies to existing buildings?
Right, and to explicitly indicate that it applies to, only to existing buildings. And I think that's it. Yeah, those are the three main, main things.
Only to existing buildings.
Right. Only to existing- Right,
Buildings?
Okay.
Is that the-
Okay.
Buildings or building?
buildings, yeah, plural. It's an S at the end.
Thank you for bearing with us. Any further discussion?
I accept the
Or
friendly
Mr.
amendment.
Stevens?
I'm just looking at that language again, explicitly
So
indicate.
Mr. Duncan accepted the amendment, so now the seconder needs to accept it.
Yeah, I will do so
Yeah,
shortly.
when you're ready, if you're
Explicitly
ready.
indicate that the proposed amendment-
They say watching legislation made is, it's like Congress making the sausage.
Don't we want to say in that third bullet that it doesn't apply only to existing buildings, that it applies to?
I think what we decided is that we do want to go with the original staff recommendation that this,
Oh.
I relented on
see.
that. I'm
So
okay
you're
with
trying to
that.
limit, okay, I'm okay with that, because I know council was concerned that, that this would apply to too many buildings, and there was a lot of uncertainty, so they were looking for ways to kind of, and this does that, so, all right, I'm with that.
Okay.
Okay, as a seconder, I accept it, the friendly amendments.
okay, any further discussion? Yes.
Gary Fuller, you had mentioned the effective date. Were you trying to capture that as a fourth thing?
Well, I mean, I guess we were. I mean, just for the existing, that's just for what existing means. I think that's okay. I think that's self-explanatory.
Okay, you had
Yeah.
discussed that as an item.
Yeah.
so-
That just clarifies what existing
So,
means.
I mean, I guess you're suggesting maybe that we would add this to the third bullet here, explicitly indicate that the proposed amendment applies only to existing buildings,
To buildings existing.
buildings constructed
As-
before the effective date of the amendment,
Existing as of the date.
existing as of the date of the amendment. Would that be clear?
Yeah, I mean, that's what you had stated earlier, so. I mean, it would be a clarifying point.
Yeah, that's it. That sounds good. Does that jibe with you? Mr. Stevens?
Yep.
Okay.
Amendments or amendment?
Mr. Duncan, did you,
Is it
Yeah, delete that S at the end
no S at the end, right?
of amendments.
Yeah.
all right. Everybody happy?
Happy as we're going to be tonight.
Okay. Can you do a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Krasner?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Comat?
Yes.
All right, the ayes have it, 4-0. Motion passes as amended.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I had one other follow-up. So, I think, with the motion, I think where it leaves us is, while the code will be not specific to a CO trigger, we're still going to have that CO review every time. So that's going to just be automatic. So we've cleaned up the code side, and, I just wanted you to understand that
That's still the
that
workflow.
will be the process that these will come through every time.
Do
So,
business is, I think keep on doing it that way. Yeah.
yeah. So I just wanted to make sure everybody's clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. What is next?
Who says we don't earn our pay? Oh, wait, I forgot, I don't get paid, but still, I'm glad you all earned your pay today.
All right. So the minutes from our last, I think this was our last meeting because we did not meet at the beginning of
September
October.
18th, yes, it was.
I think Ms. Friedlander had sent some amendments, and let me pull those up.
Did she?
She said, in the accessory dwellings update, I also noted that the city should review potential local code and/or construction requirements that are barriers to ADU construction. One example that comes up frequently in many jurisdictions is that they have a restriction to having more than one kitchen with full-size appliances, as sometimes jurisdictions restrict the second full-size stove oven, and therefore, okay. So,
Where's
Ms.
that?
Friedlander noted that specific definitions will be needed for various forms of accessory dwellings, including internal, attached, detached, and conversions. Considerations that will be more applicable to certain accessory dwelling forms. Brooks' schedule is presented. So maybe there's an additional item for Ms. Friedlander.
Another,
Yeah,
Like
like
bullet
another,
point or-
Ms. Friedlander noted that the city should review potential local code and/or construction requirements that are barriers to ADU construction.
sorry, should review,
Potential local code and/or construction requirements,
mobile code?
local code.
Local, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Local code and/or construction requirements that are barriers to ADU construction. Things like the sort of kitchen requirements that she mentions in her note here. And then I may have messed up our line, but she also said at line 293, there's a comment about her, Ms. Friedlander requested studies from other cities on accessory dwellings traffic impacts. And she says she wasn't concerned about traffic impacts as a result of implementing a new ADU policy, in as much as the impact of the number of cars that came with those ADUs. It should read, and this is her suggested edit, Ms. Friedlander requested a study of the impacts on street parking.
A
study-
study on,
Of the impacts on street parking. Or the number of cars that came with ADUs.
and strike the rest.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think her revision that she emailed is a little longer, but I think that's clear.
Okay.
Yeah, and you could argue that traffic impacts encompasses that, but if that's a
Yeah.
distinction she wants to make.
Yeah,
Isn't that what Arlington does?
yeah. Yeah, I think that's fine. Okay, any other changes?
Madam Chair, mine are purely typographical, ones that I noticed as I read through line 34. I think it's Chad Prince. I'm sorry, Price. It's Chad Price, I think, representing Mill Creek. You spell it correctly later on, so I think that's just skip the N there. And then any reference to Founders Row should not include an apostrophe. I think it's just Founders Row 2.
Okay.
That's relevant in that line, and then also in line 43 and maybe elsewhere, if you could just do a universal search and make sure that's changed. On line 100, is fire marshal spelled with 2 L's or just one? I forget.
One on line 40.
One?
I think it's just one on line 100. And there was one other I thought, but I don't know where it is.
Did you say line 100?
I did say line 100.
Oh, fire marshal.
Yeah, I think marshal of that sort is, in the military sense, is just one L.
Your English teacher would be proud.
Channeling Mrs. Graff, my grammar teacher, Miss Hudson, sorry, Miss Hudson. Yeah. I think the other thing that I saw was in some other document. It meant to say EDA and it said EDC, but I don't think that was in the minutes. Maybe Jack can find out where that is, just to make sure that that's corrected. If it's in the minutes, please correct it. Anyway, I move adoption of the minutes as corrected for the meeting of Wednesday, September 18th.
Great. The second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Just
Thank you.
one thing on the minutes, just a general thing, I just noticed, Mr. Trent, not on this set's fine. We haven't uploaded minutes to the website since, for a year. State code says they gotta be uploaded in 7 days after we approve it. So, I don't know what happened since last September, but whatever needs to happen in staff to put them online.
Okay, I'll double check that.
Just make sure, I'm looking at where we have them, and like, I know it's like, I see all the 2023, and then up through September of '23, and then it stops.
Okay, maybe
These
someone's
came up, right?
granted. Yeah.
So since you're so good about getting them done in a week.
You are, and
I-
they-
in other places, they have a problem getting them done. So we're so great about getting them done, let's just upload it, because technically the code says 7 days.
Yeah. And they're really meaty. It reminded me of how meaty a discussion that was that we had.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the detail, the level of detail and that level, the time and effort you put into creating these. Thank you.
There's been some talk at the state level about allowing boards and commissions to like substitute digital, like video recordings to substitute for written minutes. It hasn't become law yet, but it could happen. But for now, we still have we're required to have minutes. But at some point, there may come a time where Mr. Traynor does not have to do that. But the minutes could be digital. A digital recording could be substituted for written minutes. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, most people who want to know what we did, what we said, are going to watch the meeting. But so that's another thing people should always keep in mind. Like, it's good that we're very diligent and it should be accurate if we're going to go through the trouble to type them up. But yeah, there's always the safeguard of the actual recording too. But for now, it is the law that we have to have them. And once we vote on them, they're supposed to be online in 7 days.
Great. Thank you for following up on that, Mr. Traynor. Appreciate it. Okay, that was our last action item. We're running a little behind schedule. Sorry about that, but meatier discussion than anticipated on the parking ordinance. No work session items, so I think up next is information items. And Mr. Fuller, I understand you're going to be sharing the.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, I just totally skipped over planning commissioner's report.
Yes, that's correct.
Sorry. Does anybody have anything to report?
I just had one thing. There was a good session that was held up at the high school about a week or so ago. It was on sustainability and climate change. There were superintendents from schools throughout Northern Virginia. Anyway, at one point, Dr. Noonan mentioned that SunTribe, who was the contractor for the solar panels on the high school, had a lot of heartburn over the permit fees. and that had they known what those fees were going to be, they would not have bid on the job. I don't know what the details are, but it struck me as something that might be worthy of some discussion. Just off the top of my head, I don't think we would want permit fees to be stopping people from putting up solar panels. So there may be a lot more to the matter than what we were able to glean from that session, but it caught my attention, so I thought I would mention it.
Thanks for sharing that, Mr. Stevens.
That's all I have.
Anyone else? Reports? Nope. Okay. Mr. Fuller, sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. That was,
Sorry.
yeah, part of the agenda for you guys. Under the director's report, I'll start off with the upcoming schedule. As you can see on the back of the agenda, for November, we have a number of items coming up on the 4th. So we have the Yassini Jewelry site plan, so they kind of went on hold for months, and they resubmitted in the last 2 weeks. So we're completing our review of that resubmission, and we expect it to be in final form in order to be on your agenda in November. Also, the Quinn site plan, that is in following the special exception approval, and so that would be a work session for you to be introduced to that. We're reviewing and making a determination. There were some slight changes in the some of the use areas. For instance, loading was moved and so forth since the SE approval. So we're looking at those carefully as well in the context of the site plan, and you'll see all of that. So you'll see that determination as well as the new site plan. Also, the utilities chapter of the comp plan, you'll have a work session on that on the 6th. And then accessory dwellings, there'll be a draft code, and included was a work session. So you have the site plan and 3 work sessions scheduled for November 6th.
That's a very busy meeting.
I was going to say, it'll be up to the chair, but that strikes me as being way too many things in
Yeah.
one meeting.
All right. I will mention that to Paul.
Thank you. It looks like Yassini is tentative.
Then, in the following meeting, 2 weeks later, on November 20th, we have a work session to introduce a new site plan, the 821 West Broad. It's a small site that's being redeveloped for Economise Closet. And then would be the CIP kickoff, be a work session on that. And then the planning division calendar for the next year, the work program, we would have a work session to start discussion on that. And so maybe Paul and the chair can discuss if there's any November 6th work sessions that might move to the 20th.
What is 821? Sorry, what's 821 West Broad? What are they proposing?
It's the use that's down on Park Avenue.
I know the use.
Can I?
Yeah, well, anyway, they're moving there. It's an office building with a retail combination. So
Is it new construction or
it
is
is,
it a?
they would remove the existing building and be all new construction.
Yeah.
They've come in and talked to us about the setbacks and the parking requirements, because it's a tight site. It's a corner lot.
And their current site, I believe, is Zone T.
Correct.
So I have a feeling we might be hearing something about their current site at some point in the near future then, if they're vacating that site.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those are scheduled. Then in December, we have some items listed there in terms of work sessions and the end of the year survey. But anyway, those are the following month, so. that just
Yeah,
is a
maybe
highlight.
I'm not sure what the schedule is for the utilities chapter, but that strikes me as one that maybe could move from the 6th. Some of the other sort of development ones I know can be on a tighter timeline.
Okay. And just as an additional item, just so you know, Maple and Annandale special exception, that has been resubmitted, so that's our 3rd submission. So everything seems to be in right now, so we're busy with all the applications, and so We'll be reviewing that currently and then teeing that up to come back to the different bodies, and then eventually a referral from the council if that's their desire.
So the plan is for us to have one work session on the accessory dwelling draft code. And then council would do first reading, and then we would have an additional final work session in December.
Yes, that's what's shown as the schedule.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had that on November 25th. Council would do first reading, then would come back to you
And then
once it's referred out to the boards and commissions.
the final sort of public hearing would be in, I guess, sometime in early 2025, maybe
It would
February.
be, yeah, in the
Not
next
on the-
year.
Not on the calendar yet.
Yeah, usually we try and schedule a minimum of 2 months for board and commission reviews.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
On that front, I think we'll have to see how things play out, what kind of feedback, we
Right.
get, and we don't want to take anything back that feels rushed, so
Yeah.
depending on how those work sessions go with council as well, I think we'll see how the accessory dwelling schedule pans out. Again, by now, action is still scheduled for February from council, but that might get pushed back later into the spring, and we'll kind of see how that plays out. I think the other thing to call out is the first January meeting is New Year's Day right now, so I think wanted to see how the council, the commission felt about adding a second meeting for January 22nd.
So we could do our annual advance, or would that be a regular work session or regular?
That would be the advance in
Wait a-
administrative.
Yeah, we need like a reorg meeting, right? We need like our first meeting of the year.
Yeah, election of officers is January 15th, but when is the annual advance? Oh, I see it. Yeah, it is on the 22nd. But that looks, rules of procedure, remote participation policy, annual report, annual schedule of meetings. So that January 22nd additional meeting would really be mostly that organizational meeting. But we would do election of officers on the 15th.
Yeah.
But the rest of the 15th meeting would be a regular, public hearing work session.
Right.
And something going forward for the commission, I mean, I just would help with like sort of planning. I think we should get it into the habit of like adopting a calendar of meetings for the whole year. Like we meet on regular days. I mean, I think, but like, for example, like if there are certain times where we look at next year's calendar and we say, you know what? Our normal, custom is going to create these issues. Well, let's adjust it. Or we decide, you know what, we only want to meet once in August, we're going to do that. I think we should do that. I think we should adopt, I don't know what our bylaws say, but it's pretty common for boards and commissions to generally to have a calendar and to adopt the dates. That we should approve a set of dates so like we can look forward and then not be surprised. Not that we're surprised. And staff tries to keep us up to speed on things, but I think there's a lot of merit to at some point as part of a meeting, we take 10 minutes, we look at next year's calendar and we say, you know what, let's adjust it like this year and let's meet on the second Wednesday or something.
Hopefully avoid conflicts with religious holidays. And
Things like that, which they try to do
Yeah.
anyway, but sometimes we're doing it at the last minute, and so I think we could easily figure that out if we look at the whole year. I don't know what the council does. Mr. Duncan, did the council adopt a calendar for their meetings in advance?
Yeah, I
Like-
mean, they
like-
try to, but, sometimes, the clerk certainly is well-schooled in all the religious holidays, more
I mean,
so than used to be the case. So those are usually blocked off early on.
But did the council
But
actually vote
sometime-
on a slate of like a calendar?
No, I don't think they vote on it. It's just, they have the mayor's agenda meetings every Wednesday, and so sometimes, like when the VML meeting coincides with a council meeting, oh, well, I guess we need to cancel.
that's the difference. They have that
That doesn't happen.
agenda meeting
Yeah,
all the time, every week.
That may not happen until, a couple of weeks before everybody's off to VML.
I think looking ahead at holiday conflicts can be helpful.
Right, and we can
Like
plan
the New
around
Year's
it.
Day, and we had Juneteenth, I think this year too, was a conflict, right?
Yeah, and that way we
had
could.
canceled for that.
A week
But
of-
I
week
don't,
of the-
I'm a little reluctant to sort of just say, we only want one meeting in August, because what if August ends up being like a super busy
You know, I'm saying,
time
I
when we need the two meetings?
I threw that out as an example. We could just
Yeah.
adopt a calendar that has, you know,
The
every.
meetings, and then if we don't
every
have
other
enough to meet, we
Wednesday.
can cancel.
Yeah, we could just adopt a normal calendar, but if our normal calendar, which is the, you know, the second, what are we normally, the second and the fourth? First and the third,
First and
rather,
third.
First and third,
Wednesdays.
yeah.
If we see how that lays out in a given year, and we say, you know what, like, for example, right, our first January meeting now, it's like, is on a holiday.
Right,
We could adjust it, you know, and
and
say.
know that further in
Yeah,
advance.
and
Yeah, I
say-
agree with
say
that.
that month we'll meet, you know, on these Wednesdays. I don't know. There's some merit to that. A lot of boards and commissions do that. And it's part of like just the typical end of the year. They
Well,
usually do it like some point in the second half of the preceding year. You adopt next year's calendar.
I see Mr. Stoddard included as the first item for that organizational meeting, annual schedule of meetings. So maybe
Yeah, that's what
you're-
triggered me to say
Yeah,
that.
maybe
Yeah.
he's already thinking in
And,
that
and maybe that's what we're
direction.
going to do. Yeah, so that's what I thought about. So maybe
Anyway,
that's what.
enthusiasm for an annual schedule of meetings.
Yeah, no,
So
we-
the meeting on the 22nd, actually running into that week, that's Martin Luther King and the inauguration holiday on Monday.
Yeah.
Monday's a holiday.
So I
Yeah.
don't know if that moves everybody else off. I guess we still get Wednesdays, I suppose. We have first rights to Wednesdays, but council, I would think, would meet on Tuesday if they meet at all, which maybe they don't.
So anyhow, well, yeah, and that, but I mean, normally it's the kind of thing we would do before the year starts, like talking about the, you know, already, you know, like January already has a problem, so but anyhow, I guess
Let's look at like 18 months ahead is what you're saying.
I'll talk to Chairman Puentes as well and see if maybe in December we can talk about the 2025 calendar instead of doing it after the year's already begun.
Or maybe even a couple months more into 2026.
Yeah, well, at least,
And
Yeah.
bit.
or at least one year at a time, but I think, yeah, at a minimum, we can start with that. Just an idea.
It's a good one. Okay.
Any other comments on the schedule? Questions?
No, I guess not.
Nope. Thank you, Mr.
All
Fuller.
right. Commissioner Krasner's comments, Mr. Trainer's captured those for the January 22nd to put the annual schedule of meetings on there. We can move that around as needed. So anyway, we've captured that, so we'll.
We'll plan on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm available. I'm fine to meet twice in that, or move that January 1 meeting to that date.
Okay.
Everybody else okay?
All right.
Okay.
Well, we have time to revisit it, but at least we've captured it on the upcoming things. Okay.
Great.
Great. All right. Then moving to the other quick items on the director's report, the five-year outlook, we've completed that and provided you a copy of that publication. It's an annual one that, as I stated, and looks at ongoing and upcoming projects as well as into the future. And we, captured the growth in housing and how that was tracking. We also looked at the number of small and large projects that are continuing with the development of the community. Then the public investment in intermodal transportation and green space, we highlighted that, and then the ability to walk to grocery stores, we've been tracking that as well. And then population trends as well as car trips. We're using VDOT perimeter city counts as well as city center counts, which are annual counts that the VDOT does, and so we have that good history. And so we've provided that data as well.
Puentes.
Are there any thoughts or comments on those, the five-year outlook?
Madam
Go-
Chair.
yeah,
I just gave a quick look to it. I'll need to get the printed version, Jack, to wade through in more detail. I think that's the document, though, as you said, that has the data right about how close we all are to grocery stores. Does that include the Whole Foods? It wasn't clear if we're just
Not
talking.
yet, not, because it's not
So-
open yet, yeah.
Okay, so that number
We'll rise.
will increase by a significant amount when Whole Foods comes online, which is going to happen before the end of the year. I mean, right? That's the idea. So I would just like to, like to have that number be as up to date in whatever documents that we have online. And then, of course, down sometime next year, maybe 2025, we'll have at least one other grocery, and maybe optimistic to say two, but the West Falls Fresh Market grocery also. Anyway, just the flag was there to keep that number current in whatever communications that we have.
Yeah, I mean, this is a 5-year outlook, so
Yeah.
I'll make sure that those get captured as a future.
Yeah, there's
one way or the
there's
other.
a dynamism to that
Sure,
fact.
yeah, I mean-
that certainly over the next 5 years, in the next 5 years, we will reach something closer to, I would hope, 80 or 85% with the opening of the two extra groceries. And similarly, population, I've asked this before, but I'm not sure what triggers our population estimates, outside of the census, decennial census, but that number also from 14.6 surely will go over 15,000 sometime, maybe as soon as early first or second quarter of 25, when maybe a little longer than that. Sometime during 2025, that number will top 15,000. And then finally, the car trips data through VDOT's traffic count program is information that is widely either unknown or disbelieved by most people in the population. If I told them a representative sample of people that there are actually fewer people traveling through the city center, and a big number by 23%. So I'm just suggesting that we make sure that the VDOT traffic count data is somewhere where we can easily point people to it, whether it's online or in some document somewhere. But that's an important number because it measures the outcome of a lot of what we talk about here about walking and so forth, transit and such.
Yeah, that was referenced in the planning report, the planning director's report, but there wasn't an additional attachment with that analysis, right? The traffic analysis.
No, not at this
And it
time,
wasn't included
but
in the-
obviously that base data is available and we could provide that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it would be nice for posterity to be able to see those numbers. It's a shame, like you said, that Mr. Puentes isn't here tonight because this is the exact same finding that he had and published in the Falls Church News Press, I think, 3 years
Yeah,
ago?
right.
4
3 or
years
4 years
ago?
ago, yeah.
So, where
Yeah,
the
yeah.
city staff is confirming that is, as much as it might not feel like it.
Yeah.
And you know what this made me think about is that smart signal, is that smart signal?
City?
Smart city, yeah, the sort of traffic light timing
Yeah.
project. 'Cause I feel like a lot of this is, I mean, I don't know, or maybe people are just getting into the habit of being on the road at those peak times and just
Just
having a
getting
lot of
past
congestion.
construction of all the big projects.
And the construction is contributing, and that is a
Unbelievable.
temporary thing. So maybe this will get better, once that is further along. But I think the signal timing will also help. There's a lot that we can do. And then I think the other thing to think about is you don't necessarily want people driving 30 or 40 miles an
gonna
hour
say.
down Broad Street. You
Yeah.
actually, the congestion
Somebody-
is, we're putting these stoplights in to
Right.
create a more walkable environment that people feel safe crossing Broad. So, big picture, yes, we all may spend an extra 2 minutes in traffic to get from one end of the city to the other, but if that means that we can have a walkable, welcoming community, I'm happy to spend those 2 minutes, as a citizen personally. So, just big picture thoughts. Sorry, I think we got off. You were in the middle of your report, and we
No, I
started
was asking if you
opining.
had any
That was-
thoughts or
that was in
comments
response
on the
to,
5-year
right,
outlook, so
right.
that was
Okay.
appropriate. Thank you.
That was-
I really appreciate this document. It's just a really nice check-in, and I like how it walks through all the many. I'm just always continually surprised by how many projects our city staff is able to take on and accomplish, really complex projects. So I'm very grateful for that. Is this produced? Did you say it was produced quarterly? Is that right?
This is annually,
It's annual.
yes.
It's funny. I feel like we see it more often than annual.
But we have a quarterly report that we do for the department, which tracks,
Development stuff.
permits and
Yeah.
site plans and other, related things. And so
But
you're
this is-
seeing that real-time quarterly, and then you're getting this annual report that's more of a documentation of some of that, but then a real look ahead, so for 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
You're
And I
welcome.
think Ms. Arsenault, is that, who produces this or takes the lead on I'm sure it's a team effort. but,
Yeah, I think it's both Zoe and
And Laura.
Arsenault, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's really great. Please give them our compliments.
All right, on the next item, we just wanted to just let you know that we've applied for technical assistance with VDOT for the Ready, Set, Go grant program with Oak Street Elementary for the walk zone. And so it's really a target to get a grant in which we can then address the missing links in that vicinity of the elementary school. And so we just wanted to let you know that, we were applying for that and hoping to get, the ability to submit a grant and then do the construction. And then you would probably see it in a CIP project at some future date. So, any
That's great. Much
comments on
needed.
that? All right, and then the last item was just,
Actually,
Sure.
one question about
Yes.
that. Particularly at the end of the questionnaire that was on the document there's some question about, if you get this money, are you going to apply for other money? And our answer was maybe. I just wondered, is that maybe because we may not have the staff to apply for it, or we don't think we'll need it, or we don't think we'd get it, or
I think it's
as opposed to yes or no, which just made me wonder why maybe.
It's probably a combination of things where, we may get the technical assistance it's to apply for the grant. And then whether we get full funding or some kind of matching, we'll have to see. A grant usually means that, it's all paid for. So,
Okay. All right.
so we'll have to kind of see how it plays out. And so I think that's what it's kind of hedging.
Okay, all right. Well, if there's anything we can do to make maybe yes, if we get the money, I'm in favor. It's not like
Anyway.
we're hard up for money. I know. There's always competition for the dollar, but this would be an important investment in the future.
All right, then just the last item was just to let you know on the planning library, we've updated that, updated the webpage, and so if you go to that, you'll find everything's up to date. It's hard to keep it, on a regular basis, so we made a real effort to kind of go back in and clean that up, and so there's some new navigation methods that you'll find a little easier to get around as well. So, anyway, that was all the items I had to share with you on the director's report. Thank you.
That was good.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller.
Can I ask one crosswalk question of small area plans? I had sent Jack a note about the property deal at Bayer Volvo, and then I still haven't read anything about it because I don't subscribe to the Washington Business Journal. I guess there'll be some information on it, maybe in the news press online already. I don't know. At any rate, I just wondered if whatever is happening there, what effect it'll have on the TAP for the Gordon Road Triangle study, which, as far as I know, we are still proceeding on. Does anybody know anything about any of that?
Yeah, I'll have to ask about that. I know, I haven't read the news press article, but I did hear that that property's been sold. So, yes.
Okay.
So
yeah.
we'll be looking into that and how that may, involve other things.
Okay, thank you. Not related, not necessarily, but I'm not a farmer's market attendee generally, but some change has occurred in the parking for the farmer's market and the office buildings that are
Oh, I did hear about that.
that-
Yeah, that was
are
in,
is causing some, is it working out, or I don't get up that early on Saturday? What are people doing if they can't park in either the Park Avenue office building lot or the Falls Church Special Center lot?
maybe they're parking at Kaiser.
Well, that's actually why I ask, because, that would be a good sign that people say we don't have enough parking, and it's just, you've got to go find it.
Didn't this come up with Mr. Shields in one of his council reports.
Yeah,
That may have come up.
it was either in the council meeting, I don't think they talked about it again.
I think he said discussions were ongoing.
Yeah, which means, I don't know what. But at any rate, parking, yes. People find their way somehow. Or, we let people park in the city hall parking lot and move the farmer's market to some place that,
Like Park Avenue?
yeah, something like that. Or some, permanent home for the farmer's market, which
Yeah,
the city should invest in if we're so keen on the farmer's market.
it's been a big success for the city, that's for sure.
Anyway, thank you.
All right, any other questions for staff before I turn it back over for 8C correspondence to Mr. Trainer?
Nope. Any other questions?
All right, well, thank you.
I think we just have this one correspondence item, and it's one that I actually shared, so I don't know if you all had a chance to look at it. I'm continually, not surprised, but pleased, I guess, at how bipartisan an issue sort of housing reform is. So this is an example from the Mercatus Center, kind of a list of strategies that localities can pursue to increase the availability of housing. And I thought it was a good list and interesting to think about. So, and I like seeing these kinds of recommendations from both sides of the aisle.
I think you're seeing more jurisdictions all the time adopting, portions of that report.
Yeah, this is quite a list.
Yeah.
They even get into the single stair building controversy that
Oh, right, yeah, that's actually,
frequently talked about on Twitter. Single stair buildings and how they'll
The
solve all our
European-
problems.
yeah.
So like new buildings are required to have 2 stairways, and because of that requirement, buildings have to be constructed with these really long central hallways with units on either side, and then those units end up being kind of smaller, and they only have windows on one side and ventilation at one end. Whereas if you have a single stair building, my understanding is you can have more options with your layouts of the units. You can have, windows, you could have a breeze running all the way through. You can have more windows, you could have larger units.
They allow it in Europe, and they just get a lot more units.
It's for fire
A
safety.
lot more units
But
per
our
building.
standards for fire safety here, I think, are higher than they are.
Well, they're out of date, too. I mean,
Yeah, so there's a war being waged on 2 staircase requirements. But anyway, yep, take a look. That's it. Any other?
So our next bite at accessory dwellings is November 6th, is that right? And staff will have
Punchy that day.
draft code.
Shake out the week before.
Right, well, so that's what I'm saying. We will have the benefit of at least knowing what the local election results are
That's right.
before that,
Over,
which could be indicative.
yeah, I don't know.
That's right, though. We're working on the draft code. This is also sort of a updated draft recommendation, so it's a first crack at what the actual language of the code will be, but it also reflects the feedback that we heard from this commission and city council and the public generally from the second 2 open house meetings. So it's an updated recommendation and with the benefit of seeing some of the technical code draft as well.
So as the calendar falls, does that mean the planning commission will see that draft code before the council will see it? I mean, formally?
The same week, so right after, I think council is scheduled
Council's on the 4th.
for the 4th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
We
I
see
see,
it.
I'm sorry, yeah, I didn't look. So they see it on the 4th and we see it on the 6th. Okay.
Correct. And then, from there, we'll see how the schedule shakes out.
Yeah, exactly. See what the world looks like.
Great. Anything else?
Move to adjourn.
And Sal second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all.